December 16, 1944. In the snow-covered forests near Mona, Germany, a terrifying message was being scrolled onto a frost-covered page. The Americans possess a new weapon that defies all tactical doctrine, wrote Henderman Klaus Richter of the 12th SS Panzer Division. Our men are being slaughtered in their foxholes by artillery that explodes in the air above them. There is no defense, no cover. Death comes from the sky itself. Richter had just witnessed the annihilation of an entire battalion, not by a direct hit, but by shells that detonated 30 ft above their heads, sending lethal fragments downward in a pattern no entrenchment could protect against. 702 German soldiers died in 3 minutes. The few survivors stumbled back in shock, repeating only one chilling phrase: the air kills. What Richter had just encountered was the secret weapon that military experts now regard as second only to the atomic bomb in winning the war: the proximity fuse. This miniature radar system crammed into an artillery shell was the world's first smart weapon. A thinking munition so revolutionary that it increased the effectiveness of anti-aircraft fire by 1,000%. Achieved a 70% casualty rate against soldiers hiding in trenches, and ultimately destroyed 79% of the V-1 flying bombs aimed at London. This is the story of the technological marvel that changed the nature of warfare forever. The story of the shell that thought. The origins of this decisive weapon began not in America's labs, but in Britain's darkest hour. As the first winter of war settled over Britain in 1939, a young scientist named WWII submitted a proposal that seemed like science fiction: an artillery shell that could think. The concept was born from brutal mathematics. During the First World War, an average of 8,500 shells had been fired to destroy one enemy aircraft. With planes now flying faster and higher, Britain's survival in the looming air war depended on dramatically improving those odds. But solution was to embed radio waves within the shell, allowing it to detect approaching aircraft and detonate automatically at the optimal distance. He faced a problem that seemed insurmountable with 1939 technology. The radio fuse would need to survive being fired from a gun at forces exceeding 20,000 times normal gravity, spin at 30,000 revolutions per minute, and operate in extreme temperatures, all while maintaining the sensitivity to detect an aircraft 70 ft away. Initial tests proved the concept viable, but revealed the crushing reality. No existing electronic components could survive the violence of being fired from a gun. The solution would come from across the Atlantic, delivered during Britain's most desperate moment by one of history's most important scientific missions. In September 1940, the Canadian Pacific liner Duchess of Richmond arrived in Halifax, Nova Scotia, carrying the cargo of the Tizard mission, a black metal deed box containing every major British military secret. This was an unprecedented gamble by a nation fighting for survival, sharing its most closely guarded technologies with a country not yet at war. Among the delegation in Washington, British physicist Dr. John Cockcroft presented the proximity fuse research to a young American physicist, Dr. Merle A. Tu, who had recently been appointed to lead the Secret Section T of the National Defense Research Committee, had taken the job with a profound sense of moral urgency, telling his wife, "We have to find a way to stop those bombers. Technology has to provide the answer." Cockcroft was honest about British limitations. They lacked the industrial capacity and resources to pursue the massive development program required. America, with its vast industrial base and protected geography, represented the only hope. TUV left that meeting with a mission that would mobilize the entire American electronics industry for 5 years. The challenge required manufacturing techniques never before attempted. Tu assembled a team of brilliant physicists at the Carnegie Institution's Department of Terrestrial Magnetism, transforming the mansion into the nerve center of America's most secret weapons program. The proximity fuse needed to be a complete radar system, including a transmitter, receiver, amplifier, and detonator compressed into a space smaller than a coffee can. James Van Allen, a 26-year-old physicist whose later discovery of the Earth's radiation belts would make him famous, took on the fundamental challenge of creating vacuum tubes that could survive the impossible G-forces of firing. Traditional tubes shattered at 100 times gravity. The fuse needed to survive 200 times greater acceleration. Van Allen worked with a Massachusetts hearing aid company, Rathon, developing miniaturized tubes with rigid revolutionary construction. The key breakthrough came in January 1942 with his mousetrap spring innovation, a mechanical system that protected the delicate filaments during acceleration, and then released them for normal operation in flight. This patent for this shockproof tube would remain classified for decades. Another impossible innovation was the power source. Traditional batteries could not survive the G-forces or provide sufficient power in such a small space. National Carbon Company developed a revolutionary reserve battery using liquid electrolyte stored in a glass ampule. The firing shock would shatter the ampule, and centrifugal force from the shell's spin would drive the electrolyte into carbon and zinc plates, activating the battery only during flight. This meant the battery had unlimited shelf life but provided full power exactly when needed. By March 1942, the project had grown so vast it moved to an abandoned Chevrolet dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, which became the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, or APL. Two's laboratory culture was defined by his urgent motto: "I don't want any damn fool in this laboratory to save money. I only want him to save time." The proximity fuse made its combat debut not in Europe, but in the desperate air battles of the Pacific. On January 5, 1943, Lieutenant Russell Red Cochran aboard the USS Helena near Guadalcanal was briefed on the new ammunition marked with special green bands. His target, 4 Japanese Val dive bombers. In conventional combat, anti-aircraft guns needed a direct hit, nearly impossible against maneuvering aircraft. These shells only needed to pass within 70 feet of the target. The second salvo fired by the Helena saw one shell pass approximately 60 feet from the lead bomber. The explosion was unlike anything Cochrane had ever seen. It detonated in midair, sending a perfect sphere of fragments outward. The Val's wings sheared off instantly. The plane simply ceased flying. The psychological impact on the crew was profound. As gunner's mate First Class Anthony Pye later recalled, "We couldn't believe it. For months we'd fired thousands of rounds at planes, maybe hitting one if we were lucky. Now we were knocking them down with just a few shots. It was like God himself was guiding our shells." The impact rippled through the Pacific Fleet with stunning speed. A test conducted by the USS Cleveland against radio-controlled drones was scheduled for 2 days but ended in less than 2 hours after the proximity fuses obliterated all 3 targets. Admiral William Spike Bland declared, "This changes everything. Every ship in the Pacific needs these rounds immediately." By 1943, proximity fuses comprised only 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition fired, but they accounted for 51% of all Japanese aircraft destroyed by naval gunfire. The rounds per kill ratio dropped from 58 for conventional shells to just 15.5 for proximity-fused ammunition. The ultimate test came on June 19, 1944 during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, also known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Lieutenant James Van Allen, the inventor of the shockproof tube, was aboard the USS Washington watching the skies fill with Japanese planes. Those aircraft that broke through the American fighter screen faced a wall of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire unlike anything in naval history. Van Allen watched as the sky filled with black puffs and Japanese planes began falling like rain. He later wrote that the proximity fuses turned our ships into fortresses, and that courage couldn't overcome technology. By the end of the day, the Japanese had lost 315 carrier aircraft. American losses were just 29. The one-sided nature of the battle effectively ended Japanese carrier aviation. The Japanese response to this technological superiority was desperate. The kamikaze. They realized the only way to counter the proximity fuse was to eliminate the need to survive the attack. A plane destroyed 50 FT from its target by a proximity fuse had failed its mission, but a kamikaze destroyed 50 FT from its target would still crash into the ship through momentum. Statistical analysis revealed the stark shift. Conventional Japanese attacks now achieved only a 2% success rate. Kamikaze attacks achieved 34%. The proximity fuse had made conventional attacks suicidal, forcing the Japanese to embrace suicide as a tactic. Yet even against the kamikazes, the fuse was invaluable. During the Philippines campaign, proximity fuses accounted for 44% of all 5-in-gun kills. Post-war analysis concluded that without the fuse, American casualties would have doubled or tripled. The final drama played out at Raider Picket Station 1560 mi north of Okinawa on May 11, 1945. Commander Baron J. Melanie of the USS Hadley faced Kikusui No. 6, a coordinated kamikaze attack of over 150 aircraft. Hadley's 5-in magazines were loaded entirely with proximity fuse shells. For 95 intense minutes, Hadley fought for survival. The proximity fuses began their deadly work, destroying planes at 8,000 yards, 6,000 and 4,000. The gun barrels glowed red-hot and the fuses never stopped working. Though the ship was heavily damaged by 3 kamikazes that crashed into it, Hadley survived and shot down 23 aircraft, an all-time record for a destroyer in a single engagement. Commander Melanie's report stated, "The proximity fuse was indispensable to our survival. Without it, we would have been overwhelmed in the first 20 minutes." The fuse's greatest success outside of the Pacific came in the defense of London. On June 12, 1944, one day before the V-1 flying bomb offensive began, Winston Churchill made the decision to authorize the use of the proximity fuse for London's defense against the advice of security officials who feared the technology would fall into German hands. General Sir Frederick Pyle deployed 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns linked to radar and electronic gun directors. Initially, the success rate was only 24%. But as proximity fuses were flown directly from American production lines and introduced into the guns, the success rate skyrocketed 46% in the second week, 67% in the third, and 79% by the fourth week. The improvement was so dramatic that German intelligence concluded the British must have developed a secret anti-root weapon. On August 28, 1944, the defensive system achieved its ultimate success. Of 104 V-1s launched to London, the proximity fuse guns destroyed 96. The V-1 threat to London was effectively neutralized. The proximity fuse was the most effective secret weapon of the war. Not because it was the most powerful, but because it was used everywhere continuously, decisively. It was the weapon that thought, and in thinking, it helped the Allies preserve the freedom to think. It saved the free,